I know some of you came here expecting just another spooky story, something to play in the background while folding laundry, scrolling on your phone, or trying to fall asleep. But this one you're going to want to watch with the lights on. And I'm dead serious. I know that sounds like one of those exaggerated YouTube intros meant to hype up a mediocre story, but hear me. I'm not here to sell you fear. I'm here to tell you the truth. Because something happened in my house, something I still haven't been able to explain. And it started with my wife, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else in this world, whispering 4 words that flipped our entire life upside down. The dark brings him. You might think she was sleep-talking or maybe just dreaming, but no. She was wide awake when she said it, staring dead into the hallway, her face pale, her body trembling, her voice barely audible but full of certainty. The dark brings him back. And from that night on, everything changed. Let me talk to you like we're having coffee, because if you're watching this right now, you probably feel like something's off too. Maybe your partner's been acting weird. Maybe someone in your house avoids mirrors. Or maybe you've just got this unexplained tension in your chest that spikes every time the lights flicker or the power dips. You're not crazy. And you're not alone. Because once you hear what happened to me and my wife, you'll start noticing the patterns in your own life. That's the part no one talks about. These things don't happen randomly, they follow people. They follow silence. They feed on disbelief. And above all, they wait. But if you're watching this video right now, you're not going to be another victim of silence. I'll tell you everything. What happened, how it started, and what I found out about the man or whatever it was that lives in the dark. But I'll warn you, once you know, there's no going back. Now let me take you to the beginning. It was fall. That quiet, beautiful kind of October when the days get shorter and your breath starts showing in the air. We just moved into this house, a cozy 2-bedroom tucked at the edge of town, with a tiny porch swing and peeling blue shutters. We picked it because it felt still, not creepy, not haunted, just still. And after the chaos of the city, that's exactly what we thought we needed. My wife, Emily, was excited about decorating it. She loved fairy lights, vanilla candles, those chunky knitted blankets that make every photo look like a Pinterest board. And for the first week, everything felt perfect. Normal. Almost too normal. You ever get that eerie peace right before a storm hits? That's what it was like, the kind of silence that hums. But at the time, we didn't notice. Or maybe we chose not to. Emily started sleeping with the lights on around the 8th night. At first, it was subtle. She'd leave the hallway light on just in case she had to use the bathroom. Then it became the nightstand lamp. Then the ceiling light. Eventually, our bedroom looked like a hospital room at midnight. It was too bright to sleep, but every time I asked her about it, she'd brush it off. Just feeling a little weird, she'd say. You know, new house nerves. But I could tell it was more than that. Her eyes were sunken. Her hands always cold. She'd jump at the smallest sounds, the refrigerator humming, the heat kicking on, even the wind tapping against the window. And every night, no matter how tired she was, she'd make absolutely sure that every single light was on before climbing into bed. And if one bulb so much as flickered, she'd shoot out of bed like she'd been electrocuted. At first, I thought it was just anxiety, maybe even postpartum. Though we didn't have kids, she'd been through a lot emotionally. But then the talking started. Around 3 a.m., I heard her whispering. At first, I thought she was talking in her sleep, so I gently nudged her. But when I did, she turned to me, fully awake, and whispered, "He's in the corner." My stomach dropped. I asked her what corner, but she just shook her head and pulled the covers up to her chin. "Don't turn it off," she begged. "If you turn it off, he comes back." I looked where she was pointing, and of course, the corner was empty. Just a bookshelf, some boxes, a throw rug. But her fear wasn't empty. It was real. Her body language, her breathing, the sweat dripping down her neck. That wasn't a dream. That was raw terror. And that night, for the first time in my life, I left the lights on too. That morning, I asked her about it again. She denied it. Or maybe she genuinely didn't remember. I said, "What?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "In the corner?" "I don't know, babe." Probably a dream. I haven't been sleeping well. But the thing is, she had been sleeping. I hadn't. I'd stayed up all night watching her, trying to make sense of what I saw. And it wasn't a dream. It wasn't a moment of confusion or half-sleep. Something had gripped her from inside, and it was real. I just didn't know what yet. And that's when I started paying attention to the patterns. The lights. The shadows. The temperature shifts. The things she avoided, like that one hallway near the attic door. She would never pass it without turning her face away. She said the air felt heavy there, that it pressed down on her chest. But every time I walked through it, I felt nothing. Until one night, when I did. It was a Thursday. Power outage. Whole block went dark. I had been on my laptop and I remember cursing the dead battery. Emily was in the shower, singing along to some playlist. And then click silence. Not just lights out silence, but dead silence. Like the world had been sucked into a vacuum. I grabbed a flashlight and headed upstairs to tell her. But halfway up the staircase, I felt it. The air. It was like walking through a wall of cold fog, thick, icy, and alive. My heart started racing for no reason. My breath turned shallow. And I swear, for a split second, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned around, nothing was there. Just darkness. But the kind of darkness that doesn't just surround you, it watches you. That was the first night she screamed in her sleep. Loud. Panicked. The kind of scream that cuts through your chest. When I rushed into the room, she was curled in the corner, the same corner she had once pointed to, sobbing, repeating the words, "He found me again." I grabbed her, shook her, tried to calm her down. But she wouldn't stop crying until I got every light in the house back on. That's when she finally told me the truth. "He used to visit me when I was a kid," she whispered. "In my old house. In the dark. I thought I left him behind." I asked her who he was. Her answer? "I don't know his name, but I see his shadow. I hear him breathing. And he never forgives." Now listen. I know some of you watching this are skeptical. I get it. I was too. But what I saw next made me question everything I thought I believed. Because the thing about living with someone you love is, you think you know them. You think you've seen all their sides. Their laughter. Their grief. Their worst day. Their quietest night. But fear? The kind that turns their voice into a whisper and their hands into claws gripping the bedsheet like a lifeline? That's a version of them you can't unsee. And that's what I saw in Emily. A version I didn't recognize. A past I never knew existed. And someone that followed her from that past. I started digging. Into her childhood. Into the town she grew up in. I called her sister. Spoke to her old neighbor. And what I found out chilled me to my bones. There had been another house. One her family never talked about. One that mysteriously burned down when she was 12. A house she never mentioned. A house with a single surviving child, Emily. And buried in the town records something worse. Something that suggested Emily wasn't the first child to whisper about a man in the dark. But that's where I'm going to pause this part of the story. Because what happens next, you're not ready for it. You think this was just a tale about a scared woman and a few flickering lights? No. What I discovered goes deeper than ghosts, deeper than shadows, deeper than fear. The man she saw in the dark? He isn't a man at all. And he isn't done with her. Or with me. So, if you've ever felt watched in the dark, if the hairs on your arms ever rise when the lights go out, if your partner talks in their sleep about someone who never left. A week after that night, the one where Emily screamed until her throat went raw and begged me not to let the darkness in, I started keeping a journal. Not the kind where you spill your feelings, but the kind you use when you know something's wrong and you're desperate to keep track of it all. I'd write down every flicker, every sound, every strange shift in temperature. I started logging what time the lights would dim, which bulbs would blow out, and when the cold spots would hit. Because by that point, it wasn't just Emily anymore. I was starting to feel it too. The dread. The sense that there was something inside the house we weren't alone with. And that's when it really started getting into my head. You ever feel your own reality stretch a little? Like you're trying to grab onto something solid, but everything slips through your fingers like smoke? That's where I was. Wide awake in my own house, watching shadows bend in ways they shouldn't, hearing creaks where no weight should be, and pretending, just for her sake, that it was all in our heads. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Emily changed too. She wasn't just scared. She was hiding something. And not in an obvious way. It was subtle. She stopped taking her calls in front of me. Started locking her phone screen every time I walked into the room. Her texts were shorter. Her voice quieter. I caught her deleting call logs once, and when I asked her about it, she just said, "Old habits, that's all." But what habits? We had no secrets. Or at least I thought we didn't. And then there was the room. That one damn room at the end of the hallway, the one she kept the door closed on ever since we moved in. I never pushed. It was supposed to be her art room, or maybe a storage space. But I hadn't stepped inside since we unpacked. Until one afternoon, when she left to go see her sister, and I couldn't stop myself. I opened the door. And I wish I hadn't. There were no paintings. No brushes. No canvas. Just dozens, maybe hundreds of candles. Half burned down. Some melted onto the floor. All positioned in a perfect circle around a small, child-sized chair. And taped to the walls, in uneven rows, were photographs. But not of us. Not family, not landscapes. They were photos of shadows. Corners. Hallways. Blank spaces. At least they looked blank at first. But when I stared closer, and I mean really stared, I could swear I saw something in them. The outline of a figure, barely visible. Same shape. Same size. Over and over again. I snapped a few shots with my phone, but when I tried to open them later, the files were corrupted. Every single one. I didn't tell Emily I'd gone in there. I didn't want to break whatever fragile sense of peace she was trying to cling to. But from that point on, my perspective shifted. I started wondering if this wasn't just about her. What if I was being lied to? What if there was more to her past than just some childhood trauma she never got over? I mean, we've all got skeletons, but this felt different. This felt alive. Like whatever she'd been hiding hadn't stayed in her past. It had followed her here. Followed us. And that's when I made my first mistake. I reached out to her old friend, Claire. Someone Emily used to be close to in college, but hadn't spoken to in years. I found her on Facebook. Messaged her something casual. "Hey, this is Emily's husband. Just checking in. She's been acting strange lately, and I wondered if you ever noticed anything like that back then." It took a couple of days, but Claire finally wrote back. And what she said stopped me cold. She used to wake up screaming in the dorms. Said a man with no eyes would watch her sleep. Said he would crawl in through the vents. She told me once that if I ever saw the lights go out 3 times in a row without cause, to run. Not ask questions. Just run. I thought she was just having a breakdown. Then one night, we were watching a movie. Lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. She stood up, silent, and walked out. Left all her stuff behind. Never spoke to me again. I never understood why. I didn't know how to process that. I didn't even know how to look at Emily anymore. Every time I asked her about college, she'd always change the subject. Say it was boring or just a phase. But clearly something had happened there. Something she never dealt with. Or maybe something she invited. And that's when the doubt started crawling in. What if she wasn't the victim here? What if she'd brought this thing into our lives by choice? What if whatever was in the dark wasn't following her? What if it was summoned? I know how this sounds. I know how easy it is to dismiss this as paranoia. But when you're sleep-deprived, when every instinct in your body is screaming that something is wrong, and when even the people closest to you start acting like strangers, you start looking for answers in places you never thought you would. That's when I went down the rabbit hole. Reddit threads, paranormal forums, old newspaper archives. I searched everything. Looked up terms like shadow man, entity in darkness, sleep paralysis with visuals, house with haunted past. YouTube channels were full of content, people talking about demonic attachments, lucid dreaming gone wrong, sleepwalking spouses with violent outbursts. And the more I searched, the more patterns I started noticing. There were dozens of stories just like ours. People sleeping with lights on, because something watched them. People seeing the same figure in dreams, tall, lanky, no facial features, always standing in the same corner of the room. Some described it as a watcher. Others said it was a shadow person who could only be seen out of the corner of your eye. But the creepiest ones? They all said the same thing, that once you noticed him, once you acknowledged him, he became real. That talking about him gave him form. That believing in him was enough to let him in. So I tried to stop. I really did. I told myself it was sleep deprivation, that I was spiraling, that it wasn't fair to Emily. But then came the night where the lights flickered 3 times. No warning, no explanation. Just 3 sharp blackouts in a row, with perfect timing between each. And when I looked at Emily, her face had gone completely still. Not scared, not surprised, just resigned. Like she'd been waiting for it. That night, I barely slept. She didn't either. We just laid there, back to back, the entire room flooded with light. Every bulb on, even the closet light. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just inches from our bed. Watching, waiting, breathing. I didn't hear it. I felt it. Like the air was heavier on my side of the bed. Like the mattress dipped slightly, even though Emily never moved. And that's when I realized, if this thing was real, and I was starting to believe it wasn't just here for her anymore. It had its eyes on me now. The next day, I confronted her. No more games. No more quiet tolerance. I told her I knew about the college stories, about Claire, about the photos in the locked room. I asked her, point blank, "Did you bring this here? Is this your doing?" And her response was the last thing I expected. She laughed. But not out of amusement, out of fear. The kind of laugh that means you've lost all hope. The kind of laugh that says, "You're too late." Then she looked me in the eye and said, "You think I brought him here? You think I control him? No. He came for you the moment you opened that door. That was 3 nights ago. And now things are worse. But I'll save that for the next part. Because what happened after that, what I saw with my own eyes, isn't something I can just say. You have to feel it. And believe me, you will. If you've made it this far, you're already part of it. Next time, I'll show you how he enters the house. And how he chooses who to take first. I didn't sleep the night after Emily told me he came for me. I just sat at the kitchen table with every light on in the house, scrolling through old messages, old photos, anything that might tell me when this really started. Because if I was being honest with myself, the signs were there before the candles, before the screams, before even the move. I remembered how I used to wake up in our old apartment feeling like someone was in the room, even though I knew Emily was asleep next to me. I chalked it up to stress. But now I couldn't help but wonder, had this thing been following me long before I even met her? Had I been looking in the wrong direction this whole time? The next morning I decided to retrace our steps. I figured if I couldn't trust Emily to give me the full truth, I had to go around her. So I went to the town hall to pull up records on the house, the real history, not just the surface level stuff they put in the listing. And that's when the first real obstacle hit me. The file for our address was missing. Not checked out, not archived. Asterisk gone star. The woman at the desk kept clicking through the digital system, muttering to herself. "It's weird," she said. "Every house on that block has a file. Permits, past owners, fire codes. But yours doesn't show up at all. It's like no one ever lived there." She offered to escalate the request to a supervisor, but her tone was that of someone who already knew the answer wouldn't change. The house was invisible on paper. And it wasn't just there, it was off Google Street View, too. I pulled it up on my phone and watched as every other house on the block came into view, but ours was just a blur. Like the lens smeared itself on purpose. That night, something even weirder happened. I went to open my journal, the one where I'd been writing everything down, and the last 10 pages were ripped out. Clean, deliberate. Not a random tear. Not something I'd done by accident. Gone. My notes about the flickering patterns, the time codes, the behavior shifts, all missing. I confronted Emily about it, and she swore she hadn't touched it. And maybe she hadn't. But someone or something had. That journal had been under my pillow the night before. I would have noticed anyone taking it. And yet it was gone. Which told me one thing. I wasn't the only one watching the house. Something else was watching me. But the real shift came 2 days later, when a man showed up at our front door. He looked like he hadn't slept in a month. Dark circles, beard, stubble, shirt buttoned wrong. He said his name was Carter, and that he used to live in the house before us. Except, according to the records, no one ever had. "You don't know what you're living with," he said, his voice hoarse, like he'd been screaming into pillows for years. "You think it's about your wife. It's not. That house, it pulls people in, makes you think it's following you, makes you think you're special. But it's not about you. It's the house. It wants to be remembered." Asked him why the records were gone. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Because no one who leaves that house wants to be connected to it ever again." Then he reached into his coat and handed me a faded photograph. It was the same room in our house, the one Emily kept locked. Only this time, there were 3 figures in the candle circle. One of them was unmistakably Emily, even though she looked younger. And the other 2? Blurred. Faded out, like the camera couldn't keep them still. "This was from a ritual," Carter said. "She didn't summon it. She released it." Before I could ask anything else, he turned and walked away. I haven't seen him since. That night, I waited until Emily was asleep and snuck into the candle room again. I needed to see if there was anything left. I moved the chair, peeled back the rug, and that's when I found it. A trapdoor. Hidden in the floorboards, sealed with rusted nails. I had no tools, so I just sat there staring at it, trying to imagine what might be underneath. And then I heard her voice behind me. "You weren't supposed to find that." I turned and saw Emily standing in the doorway. No rage. No panic. Just sadness. Like she knew this was coming. Like she'd seen it before. I asked her what was down there. She wouldn't say. Asked her why she'd never told me about the photo. Her eyes welled up with tears and she whispered, "Because one of those people in the photo died. And the other isn't a person anymore." Then she turned around and walked back to bed. Left me sitting there with nothing but the hum of the bulbs above me and the cold draft rising from beneath the floor. The next morning, the trapdoor was gone. Not sealed. Asterisk gone star. Like it had never been there at all. The floorboards were smooth, seamless. Like I imagined the whole thing. And when I showed Emily the photo Carter gave me, she stared at it for a long time, then quietly tore it in half. "There's no proof," she said. "That's the only way to survive. You don't keep proof. You forget." But I couldn't forget. Because now, I wasn't just scared for her. I was scared of her. And the worst part? That night, I got a call from Claire, the friend from college. She said she had one more thing to tell me. Something she'd remembered. "Emily used to say something over and over again in her sleep," Claire said. "Not about the man in the corner. Something else. A phrase. I looked it up back then, but it didn't make sense. Still doesn't. She kept repeating, 'He doesn't walk on floors.'" I had no idea what that meant. Until the attic door opened by itself the next day. And something started crawling across the ceiling. The moment the attic door creaked open, something inside me changed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a primal recognition. Like my body remembered something my mind wasn't ready to face. I stood there in the hallway, frozen, as the draft rolled out from the pitch-black opening above. The ladder was still tucked up, but the door had swung open on its own, and I swear the temperature in the hallway dropped by 10 degrees in an instant. I stared up at the darkness above me, but what struck me more than the silence was what I heard inside that silence. Not a sound exactly, but a weight. A shift. Like the air itself was listening. I backed away slowly, didn't call for Emily, didn't speak, didn't even breathe too loud. Because in that moment I knew. Asterisk at asterisk was awake. I didn't go back upstairs that night. I slept on the couch, or at least tried to. Every creak in the walls felt louder. The furnace kicked on, and I jumped. At one point, I swore I heard footsteps directly above me in the attic, even though no one was up there. I wanted to believe it was just the house settling, but deep down I knew better. And I wasn't the only one. Because just before dawn, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my younger brother, Evan, who lives 2 states over and hadn't spoken to me in months. We'd grown apart, different lives, different cities, but suddenly he was texting me at 4 in the morning with a single line that chilled me more than the open attic. "Did you ever see it crawl across the ceiling?" My heart stopped. I didn't respond at first, because I didn't know how. He had no way of knowing what had happened here, what I'd seen. We hadn't spoken about the house, about Emily, about anything. So I waited until the sun was up, then called him. He answered on the first ring, voice shaking. Said he'd had a dream, at least he thought it was a dream. A dream where something stood in the far corner of his ceiling, not walking, not floating, but slithering across the beams. He'd woken up in a sweat and, without thinking, had texted me. "I don't know why I sent that," he said. "But when I woke up, your name was already typed into my phone." I told him everything. The house, the shadows, Emily's strange behavior, the attic door. I expected him to tell me I was losing it, but instead, he whispered something I'll never forget. "This isn't your house's first life." That's when the second layer of the nightmare began to unfold. Evan had been researching his own house, his girlfriend's, actually. They'd moved in 6 months ago, a rental in a small Michigan town. And weird things had been happening there too. Cold spots. Lights flickering. The smell of burned plastic even when nothing was turned on. But more than that, he'd been having visions. Of a man. Or a shape that looked like a man. Except this one never stood, it always hung. From the ceiling. Just above eye level. Just enough for you to feel it but never clearly see it. I asked him to send me photos of his place, of the room where it happens. When I looked at the image, my blood ran cold. The wallpaper. The trim. The beam running across the ceiling. It matched the room we sealed off in our own house. A perfect match. Different state, different address, but the same blueprint. Somehow, our houses were connected. I started digging even deeper, desperate to find any trace of a connection. And that's when I came across something buried in a YouTube livestream I barely remembered doing over a year ago, a home tour I uploaded when Emily and I first moved in, just for fun. I rewatched it to see if I missed anything. And sure enough, at the 6-minute mark, during a shot of the hallway, there's a flicker in the upper right corner of the frame. A shadow. Barely visible, easy to miss. But what's worse is the live chat replay. There was a comment I hadn't noticed back then. From an account with no profile photo and a string of random numbers as the username. The comment said, "He lives behind the walls. Stop filming." The comment had been posted in real time. While I was still recording, I clicked on the account, but it was already deleted. No history, no other uploads, nothing traceable. That's when the paranoia started to sink in. Because this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just a presence anymore. It was watching. It was choosing who saw it, and when. And it didn't want to be exposed. The second I tried sharing it with the world, even unintentionally, it responded. Which made me wonder, had Emily known this all along? Had she let me do that to her? Had she wanted the thing to spread? That night, I confronted her again. This time, I didn't tiptoe around the subject. I told her about Evan, about the matching room, about the YouTube comment. She didn't flinch. She just stared at me and said, "He's getting stronger. He's choosing new places now." Then she walked away. It was the way she said it. Like it was inevitable. Like she'd accepted it. And that's when the final betrayal dropped. I got a text from Claire, the college friend, again. Just one sentence. "You need to ask her what happened the night her roommate died." The breath left my lungs. I'd never heard anything about a death. I called Claire immediately, and she sounded shaken. Said she hadn't wanted to tell me before, because she thought it was just a coincidence. But back in college, Emily's roommate had been found dead in their dorm bathroom. Cause of death: massive cardiac arrest. No prior health issues. Found clutching the ceiling tile that had somehow fallen onto the floor beside her. There was no explanation. I hung up the phone and just sat in the living room, completely still. That's when I noticed the candles were lit again in the locked room, even though neither of us had touched them in weeks. All of them, burning in perfect sync. And on the wall behind the chair, something new had been scratched into the drywall. I walked closer, and the closer I got, the colder the room became. When I finally made out the message, I nearly fell backwards. It said, "I never needed her. I needed you." And just beneath it, something even worse. "The ceiling won't hold me much longer." I don't know what that means yet, but I can hear it now, scratching above my bed, like nails dragging across the beams. It's not waiting in the corner anymore. It's moving. The day I saw the scratch marks on the wall, the message that made it clear this thing no longer needed Emily, I told myself I had to leave. Not tomorrow, not in a week. Now. The air in the house was changing. It wasn't just cold anymore, it was dense. Like something invisible pressed against your skin when you walked through the hallway. The lights still worked, but they felt duller somehow, like they weren't pushing the darkness back as well as they used to. I didn't tell Emily I was planning to leave. Honestly, I wasn't even sure I could trust her anymore. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't even ask where I was going when I packed a small bag and told her I was heading to my brother's place for a few days. She just stood there in the doorway, arms at her sides, looking at me with this unreadable expression. No anger, no sadness, just tired. Like she'd known this was coming for a long time and there was no point fighting it. I left that evening, just before sunset, driving with no music, no radio, nothing. Just the hum of the tires and the sound of my thoughts tearing themselves apart. But halfway through the trip, maybe an hour out, I noticed something strange. The car behind me, a silver SUV, had been there for miles. Too many miles. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I slowed down. It slowed down. And when I pulled off onto a rest stop exit, it followed. That's when the panic hit full force. I didn't stop. I looped through the lot, pretended I was lost, and got right back on the highway. The SUV didn't follow that time. It kept going straight. But by then, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. Because I knew it wasn't random. I knew it was connected. When I got to Evan's, I tried to act normal. I told him I just needed a break, needed sleep, needed to get away from the house. He knew better. He gave me space, but I could tell he was watching me. Like he was waiting to see if I'd start sleepwalking or mumbling in my dreams like he used to when things were at their worst. But that night, while I was lying on the couch pretending to sleep, he came downstairs and woke me up gently. His face was pale. "I think someone's been in the garage," he said. "The door was unlocked, and there's mud on the floor. But I haven't gone in there in days." We both went out, flashlights in hand. And sure enough, smeared across the cement floor in long dragging streaks was a line of black mud. Mud that led from the side door to the corner of the garage, where a stack of old furniture sat under a tarp. When we pulled the tarp back, we both froze. Sitting right on top of an old desk was a photo. The same photo Carter had given me. The candle circle. Emily. The two blurred figures. Except this one was different. This one had a new detail, something I hadn't seen in the version I'd kept hidden away. Behind the three figures, barely visible in the shadows, was a fourth, taller than the others. No face, just a vague outline like someone caught in motion. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. I felt it again then, the same way I had when the attic door opened. Like something had reached through the walls and touched the back of my neck. I turned around, expecting to see someone there. But there was only darkness. The next morning, Evan was gone. His phone was still on the kitchen table. His wallet. Even his shoes. No note, no message. Nothing. I searched the entire house, ran outside, called his name until my throat burned. I even checked the garage again, half expecting to see a second photo waiting for me. But it was empty. Just the faint smell of damp wood and that same black smear near the corner. I called the police, of course. Filed the report. But they asked the same questions I didn't have answers to. When did he leave? Where could he have gone? Did he say anything strange before disappearing? And I couldn't exactly say. Yes, he said the ceiling might not hold it much longer. That night, I locked every door, turned on every light, and sat alone on Evan's couch with my hands shaking and my thoughts screaming. This thing, whatever it was, it didn't just follow us. It chose us. And now it was punishing anyone who tried to help. My brother didn't even believe in this stuff at first. But now he was gone. disappeared into thin air. And the worst part? I couldn't even be sure Emily hadn't known this would happen. I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. I sent a dozen texts, just one-word questions. Where's Evan? Did you do this? Is it still with you? But she never answered. Until midnight. That's when I got a reply. Just one sentence. You should have stayed in the house. My chest went tight. The room felt smaller. And as I sat there, the power cut out. Not all at once. Not with a pop. But slowly, light by light, like something was walking through the house, turning them off one by one. I haven't seen Emily since. But I know she's not the only one I need to be afraid of now. Because just before the last light went out, I looked up. And the ceiling was cracking. I didn't leave Evan's house after the power went out. I couldn't. Something inside me said if I moved, if I crossed the threshold of that door and stepped back into the world like everything was normal, I'd be lost. I'd vanish just like he did. So I stayed, surrounded by half-melted candles and dim flashlight beams, my eyes glued to the hairline fracture forming in the ceiling plaster above me. It stretched slowly, like a vein splitting open. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. But sometime around dawn, just when the early gray light started bleeding through the blinds, I heard a knock at the front door. Soft. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Not someone panicking. Someone waiting. And against everything my instincts screamed, I opened it. Standing on the porch was Carter. The man who had warned me about the house weeks ago, and then vanished without a word. He looked worse. Like whatever he'd been running from had finally caught up. Deep wrinkles had settled into his face, his eyes sunken, his lips cracked. But there was something calmer about him, too. Like he'd stopped fighting and finally accepted something I still hadn't. He pushed past me without saying hello, went straight to the living room, and dropped a folder on the coffee table. It's not the house, he said, voice hoarse. It never was. I stared at the folder, hesitant to open it. Because somehow, I already knew that whatever was inside would unravel everything I thought I understood. He told me to sit. I did. Carter explained that years ago, long before Emily, before this house, before any of us were born, there was a man named Rainer Sloan, a self-proclaimed researcher of transdimensional cognition, someone who believed our thoughts could physically shape the world around us. Not in a metaphysical, law of attraction way. In a literal, tangible way. He believed that once enough people imagined the same thing, gave it form in their dreams, spoke its name in fear or wonder, that entity could take shape, could crawl through cracks in our reality and stay. He believed in what he called collective hauntings, not ghosts tied to locations, but ideas that became real through repetition, memory, and fear. He believed some places were more vulnerable than others, places with trauma, with loss, with silence. The folder contained transcripts, newspaper clippings, a handful of photographs so damaged by time they looked like they'd been pulled from a fire. But the twist, the part that made my skin go cold and my breath shallow, was a single photo buried deep in the pile. It wasn't labeled. It wasn't dated. But it showed a room almost identical to the candle room in our house. Same arrangement. Same circle. And in the center, sitting upright in that small chair, was a young woman I didn't recognize at first. Pale. Long dark hair. Hands folded neatly in her lap. But then I looked closer. I saw the eyes. The mouth. The faint scar on the left side of her cheek. It was Emily. But the date scribbled on the back of the photo, barely visible in faded ink, said star 1991 star. She wasn't even born until 1994. At least, that's what she told me. That's what it says on her license, her records, everything I've ever seen. Asked Carter if it was a mistake. If maybe it was someone who just looked like her. He shook his head. It's not just one photo, he said. There are others. From other towns. Different years. She shows up over and over again. Always near the epicenter of the same phenomenon. He pulled out another image, this one even older, from what looked like the early 80s. A black and white security still from a psychiatric hospital. 4 people seated around a table. One of them was unmistakably Emily. Same eyes. Same expression. Not aged. Not altered. The same. That was the twist. She hadn't been followed by something. She was the thing. Or at least part of it. I felt like the floor dropped out beneath me. Every memory, every late-night conversation, every whispered fear she'd shared, it all shifted in my mind like a puzzle whose pieces suddenly fit into an entirely different image. I remembered how she'd always steered me away from certain topics. How she'd downplayed her past, avoided cameras, never kept photos of herself as a child. I thought it was trauma. Some terrible event. But what if there was nothing to remember? What if she didn't have a childhood, at least not in the traditional way? What if she had always been drifting, slipping from town to town, face unchanged, carrying this presence with her, not because she feared it, but because she was the vessel that carried it? Carter said something else then, something I still haven't fully unpacked. He said, people like her, they're not haunted. They're the origin. But they don't always know it. Not at first. They just wake up one day with missing time, a hole in their memory, a dream they can't shake. Then people start disappearing. Doors open by themselves. The ceiling begins to crack. And the thing she carries inside wakes up a little more each time. I asked him why he was telling me all this now. Why he waited. He looked at me with this terrible expression, part pity, part dread, and said, because last night I dreamed of her again. But this time, you were sitting in the circle. Then he stood up and walked out the front door. Just like that. I haven't seen him since. I sat in the silence for a long time, just staring at the folder, the photos, the pieces of a life that didn't seem possible. Then I opened my phone, searched her name, dug deeper than I ever had before. And buried on an old, abandoned blog from over a decade ago, I found a post from someone claiming to have lived with a woman named Emily, who never slept, who whispered names in her sleep, who disappeared one night without a trace. The last line of the post made my blood run cold. She told me he lives in the dark, but the dark lives in her. I thought this started with a haunted house. I thought I was trying to save my wife. But now I'm not even sure she was ever mine to begin with. I went back to the house that night. I didn't plan to, didn't pack a bag, didn't call anyone. I just drove, engine silent, headlights off until I was halfway down the block, the neighborhood asleep under a veil of moonlight. There was no logical reason for it. Every part of me screamed to stay away, to burn it down and disappear, to erase whatever history I had with that house, with Emily, with the thing that was wrapped around our lives like a vice. But some part of me knew this wouldn't end unless I faced it. You can't outrun something that lives inside your own memory. You can't fight shadows by avoiding the places they crawl from. And more than anything, I needed to see her again. I needed to know if the woman I loved was still inside, whatever she had become. The house was pitch black. All the bulbs had blown out or been taken, I couldn't tell. Every window looked hollow, like the inside had been emptied, swallowed whole. The door was slightly ajar. It hadn't been broken. It had been left open, almost like it expected me. I stepped inside, flashlight gripped tight in my hand, and the air hit me like a wall, musty, dense, and electric, as if the house had been holding its breath since I left. The furniture was gone. The rugs, the frames, everything we'd built together over the years vanished. Only the candle room remained intact, door open, warm orange light flickering from within. Emily was standing in the center, still, calm, surrounded by hundreds of lit candles, all arranged in spiraling circles that covered every inch of the floor. Her hair hung loose, her eyes wide but unfocused, like she was caught somewhere between sleep and a trance. I called her name. No response. I stepped closer, and the flames trembled, not from wind, but as if reacting to me. The temperature in the room dropped and rose at once, like the air didn't know what season it was. And then she finally spoke. He's awake now. I asked her who he was, even though I already knew it wasn't someone I could understand in any human sense. She tilted her head, and for the first time, really looked at me. And what I saw behind her eyes wasn't fear. It wasn't pain. It was peace. He's not evil, she whispered. He's memory. He's the part we all bury. That moment before the light goes out when your breath hitches, and you wonder if you'll wake up. That's him. I begged her to stop whatever she was doing, to leave with me, to fight back if there was still a part of her that remembered us. But she just smiled, and behind her, the walls of the room began to ripple. I don't mean figuratively. The shadows on the wallpaper moved, like oil slicks on water. The ceiling began to crack wider, deep veins splitting across the plaster as a low sound filled the air, not a growl, not a roar, something deeper. Something that made my bones hurt. And then it all hit at once. The house didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. The memories, the visions, the flickering lights and cold spots and photographs. All of it hadn't followed Emily, it had followed me. She'd just been the conduit, the antenna. The one designed to awaken the truth, not carry it. Carter had been wrong. The thing wasn't created by belief. It had always existed, but it needed someone broken enough, fragmented enough, to let it in. Someone who had been primed for years by trauma they didn't remember. And the final piece, buried so deep I'd never even seen it coming, was this. I was the one who summoned it. A long time ago, before I met Emily, before I even left home. She didn't bring it into my life. She came to contain it. She'd been running toward me all this time. And she was running out of time. The candles flared violently, a rush of wind spiraling upward as the ceiling split completely, chunks of plaster falling like dead skin. From the darkness above, something began to descend, not a body, not a creature, but a distortion. A warping of the air, like reality itself was bending to allow something through. My body screamed to move, but my feet locked to the floor. I looked at Emily, and in that moment, she was crying, not out of fear, but from the sheer pressure of holding back something enormous for too long. You made him real, she said, her voice trembling. And now only you can send him back. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph, the original one, the version with the fourth figure fully visible. It burned at the edges in her hand, the flame eating through it as she stepped back and let it drop to the floor. And with it, the room pulsed, as if the house itself was trying to breathe. I realized then, in one last awful burst of memory, where I had seen that figure before, not in dreams, not in visions. In the mirror. Years ago. The thing that watched me wasn't a stranger. It was my reflection, missing from every photograph, warped in every reflection, because it was the part of me I had left behind to survive whatever I'd lived through. I had split myself, and now the other half wanted back in. In a final, desperate move, I stepped into the center of the candle circle. The heat was unbearable. The sound, the distortion, was deafening now, like the whole world was being stretched into static. I closed my eyes, thought of every moment that had brought me to this place, every doubt, every mistake, every time I had chosen silence over truth. And then I said his name. Not his name. My name. The one I used to be. Before the memory. Before the fracture. And the second I did, the candles went out. Not one by one. All at once. Silence. Darkness. Stillness. I woke up the next morning on the floor of an empty room. The house was abandoned. No candles. No Emily. No furniture. No cracks in the ceiling. Just me. Alone. I stumbled outside, and, to my shock, the neighborhood looked different. Brighter. Warmer. A for sale sign was in the yard. My car was gone. And when I asked a neighbor walking his dog how long the house had been empty, he said, about 5 years. No one's lived there since the fire. The fire? I asked him what happened. He shrugged. Just some guy. Lived alone. They said he lost it one night. Set the place on fire. They never found a body. Just ash and bones. I turned back to the house. And in the second-story window, just for a moment, I saw her. Emily. Staring down at me with a faint, tired smile. Then she turned and vanished into the dark behind the glass. I didn't go back to the house after that day. Whatever I'd seen in that window, whether it was a memory, a ghost, or some last flicker of guilt, it was enough. I got in a rental car that evening and just started driving. No destination. No plan. Just the road stretching out ahead of me like it always had, asking nothing, promising nothing. I told myself I wasn't running anymore, that I was simply leaving something behind that no longer needed me. But the truth is, you don't really leave something like that. You learn how to live with it. You fold it into the silence between thoughts, tuck it into the corners of your reflection, and hope it doesn't grow strong enough to return. And some nights, when I'm driving past an empty lot or a row of darkened homes, I catch myself looking at the upper windows, waiting for a shadow to move or a candle to flicker to life. It never does. But the fact that I still look, that's the part I've accepted will never change. I spent a few weeks off the grid. No phone, no social media, nothing that could tether me to the world I just crawled out of. I checked in on Evan's place once, hoping maybe he'd returned or left some sign he was alive. But it was empty, cold, still untouched, just as we'd left it. The police had closed the missing person case, labeled him a voluntary disappearance. That's how they handle things they can't explain, by assuming people walk away from their lives on purpose. And maybe in some abstract way he had. Maybe he chose to become part of whatever that thing was, just like I almost did. Or maybe it never gave him a choice. Either way, his phone never turned back on. His credit cards were never used again. And I never heard from him. Not even in my dreams. He's just gone, like a chapter torn from a book that you remember reading but can no longer find on the shelf. I never saw Carter again either. His number disconnected. His last known address was empty. But sometimes when I walk through a public library or pass by an old church, I see someone who looks like him, just out of reach, just out of focus. And I wonder if he's still out there, hunting for the next person who's been marked by the shadow. Because that's what it really is, not a monster, not a demon, not a curse. It's a shadow. A thing we create with our silence, our fear, our refusal to look too closely. And once it finds a crack, trauma, grief, memory, it pours in like water. You think you're seeing something supernatural, something evil. But what you're really seeing is the part of yourself you buried too deep for too long. And when it finally stands in front of you, all you can do is choose, face it or fade into it. As for Emily, I don't know. I've scoured public records, old newspapers, even obscure YouTube channels that cover real-life ghost stories and missing persons. Every so often, her name surfaces, attached to a photograph, a college yearbook, a death notice that gets retracted days later. But it's never really her. Just fragments. Glimpses. I think she still walks somewhere between here and there, between what we understand and what we pretend doesn't exist. I don't know if she was born like that, or if something made her that way. But I know she saved me. Even if she had to lie. Even if she had to let me believe she was the danger. Because in the end, that's what she was trying to do. Carry the weight alone. Contain it. Protect me from it. And now that burden is mine. I keep the photo in a lockbox now, the last one that survived. The one that showed me everything. I look at it sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the world feels thin. It reminds me that what happened was real. That I didn't dream it. That there was a house, and a circle of candles, and a presence waiting in the ceiling. But it also reminds me of something else, something Carter said before he vanished. That some things don't need to be defeated. They just need to be remembered. That's how they stay contained. You don't run. You don't fight. You witness. You tell the story. And that's what I'm doing now. Maybe this sounds like another internet story, another viral horror tale meant to get clicks and shock views. Maybe you're watching this and thinking none of it could have happened. That no one really vanishes like that, no house really moves between cities, no photo can change its image. But I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just making sure the story gets told. Because someone else will find a candle. Someone else will wake up in the middle of the night and think they see movement in the ceiling. And when they do, I want them to know, it's not just in their head. It never was. And if they listen closely in the silence after the lights go out, they might hear it too. That voice. Calling the name they don't remember giving. The one they left behind. And maybe, just maybe, they'll remember in time to blow out the candles. Before the ceiling cracks. Before the dark remembers them. That's the part Emily couldn't do. But maybe you can.